Hello everyone, welcome back to your show The Art Show. الخطرة اللي فاتت كنا مع أصلا على جغواز وين هضرنا على Byzantine architecture. كنا دخلنا in the Middle Ages. هذه الخطرة حنهضروا على the evolution of architecture وين حنهضروا على Gothic architecture specifically. الخطرة اللي فاتت كي هضرنا على Byzantine architecture قلنا it was followed and it heavily influenced Romanesque architecture. بصح Romanesque architecture ما قعدتش Romanesque برك in Europe، زادت ايفولوات حتى هي ولات لنا Gothic architecture، وما نقدروش نهضروا على Gothic بلا ما نهضروا على Romanesque. هذا الفيديو حنقسموها على زوج. We're gonna talk about light، كيفاش ايفولوات من Romanesque dark cathedrals into Gothic luminous cathedrals. ومن بعد in the second video حنهضروا على all that is architecture and technicalities really. So, كي نهضروا على Romanesque لازم نهضروا على عفسة كي très importante في Romanesque اللي هي the Roman arch. The Roman arch is a semicircular arch, a simple semicircular arch. بصح فيها عفسة هذايا the Roman arch. هذا semicircular arch كي تكون عنده بوا من فوقه يبوسينا all the pressure لي كوتي. كي يبوسينا the pressure لي كوتي لازم يكون عندنا very thick walls في لي كوتي باش يقدروا يحملونا and they resist هذيك لا بريسيون. بصح كي يكون عندك very thick walls c'est très difficile باش you make a window and thus Romanesque cathedrals كانوا بزاف the windows تاعهم بزاف صغار، كانت very dark even on the inside and think of it فهذاك الوقت ما كاش the light bulb. And since ما كاش the light bulb, the only light that could come in جاية متواقي جاية from the windows and ما كاش تواقي, so it was very dark and very stuffy inside. من بعد كاين واحد العابد اسمه عابد سوجي. هذا عابد سوجي كان في كاتدرال دو سان دوني. Bon, هاد لا كاتدرال دو سان دوني is extremely important because of two things. الحاجة الأولى كانت هي اللي يدفنوا فيها the French monarchs. Now we're talking about the 12th century à peu près, so 1100 quelque chose, and كانوا فيها يدفنوا the French monarchs. بصح هذه Cathedral of Saint Denis كانت a small cathedral. ومن بعد هذا عبد سوجي had very strong political influence. He was advisor to the king. He was actually advisor to two kings. ومن بعد he was even regent في واحد الوقت. And thus قال لك باللي had the Saint Denis Cathedral which later became a basilica. قال لك بلي it's not fit for the French monarchs. تسمى قال لك لازم نكبروها، لازم نوسعوها. And what we should know about cathedrals is that الحاجة الأولى هضرنا عليها الخطرة اللي فاتت قلنا بلي cathedrals l'orientation تاعهم كيما l'orientation تاع الجامع l'orientation تاعو للشرق. Et en fait cathedrals فلاس ما تكون القبلة تاعهم القبلة فلاس ما تكون القبلة تاعهم لمكة، القبلة تاعهم لجيروسلم ولا للأقصى بلوتو للقدس. And thus الكاثيدرالز تاعنا كانت عندهم فيهم الدخلة تاعهم ومن بعد a long nave a big hall هكايا، ومن بعد عندنا the altar ومن بعد more the altar there is something called the choir اللي موراه كاين small chapels. And in Romanesque architecture هادوما the chapels are like rooms, they're not even part of the like choir, so like they're individual rooms اللي نقدروا نطلعوا عليهم. And again thick walls, small windows, they were very dark. And thus هدايا عبد سوجي thought about something. Of it, what he thought about is opening up the space لمور هدايا the choir. When he wanted to open up the space قال لك باللي لازم هاد the chapels ما يبانوناش كوم pièces that are like individual, that are apart from the choir. They should be melted in. And to do that, he used very big arches and he tried to use thin walls باش يفتح لنا the space inside. And when you look at this picture, we see how it's very open inside compared to a Romanesque chapel. When he did this, he thought about something else after opening the space. The problem is when you open a space, you increase the roof volume and thus لازم حاجة اللي تحكموا هدايا the roof. And thus he innovated في vaulting. مع الأول كنا نهضروا على Romanesque architecture كنا نهضروا على barrel vaulting. دوكا نهضروا على ribbed vaulting. And we see how it looks like a spider web of vaulting that we see. And when you look at this floor plan of the chapels, we see how even the columns جايين like arrows that are pushing inside باش يحكموا لنا the immense weight of the roof, and they open up the space inside. ومن بعد after opening up the space خلاص حكمنا the roof c'est bon. So like now there is another element in Romanesque architecture. It was dark because there were no windows. And thus عبد سوجي قال لك لا قال لك I gotta open up the windows. And of it هذا عبد سوجي there's a funny story to it, because عبد سوجي كان يقرأ في كتاب and he thought que هذاك الكتاب كتبوه Saint Denis, like the patron saint of the church. En fin de compte هذاك الكتاب he was mistaken, it was actually for a philosopher. And هذاك الكتاب هضر فيه على the importance of light. باسكو علاش؟ of it cathedrals are supposed to be an extension of the holy Jerusalem. They're supposed to represent heaven. You're supposed to go in and contemplate divinity and heaven. And thus قال لك I gotta have a lot of light inside. بصح ماشي normal light. He wanted colored light. He wanted colorful light. So we didn't want natural light. We wanted to transform the light and make it more heavenly. بعد when he did those windows, the space became flooded with light. Actually, لو كان compare Romanesque to Gothic, we see that هادوما the windows déjà in Romanesque قلنا كانوا small but also كانوا عاليين, because we didn't want to hurt the integrity of the wall. They feared the wall would collapse really because of the immense weight of the arch. But in Gothic we see how the windows هبطوا, and we see how they're very big and very colorful. And this takes us to another important part of Gothic architecture, which is the stained glass windows. Keep in mind I'm جايين from Romanesque architecture with the semicircular arch. بصح the Gothic architects were influenced by Muslims and they innovated the pointed arch. The pointed arch is a masterpiece. It's an immense part of Gothic architecture because of many characteristics that we're gonna explore next time. But now what we should know about this pointed arch is that it gives us a sense of verticality. The arch was pointed. It was almost like an arrow telling us to look up in the cathedral. And thus it also gave us the ability to transform the thick walls into thin ones, and eventually the windows became actually sculpted within the walls and the stained glass was put in them. And the stained glass is important because the stained glass told stories. It told biblical stories. And at the time, a lot of people were illiterate, and it was called the poor man's Bible, because the medieval man would go in and look at the stained glass windows, and he would see the stories of his religion, the story of the creation, the story of the Annunciation, and so on and so forth. And these big windows played a huge role into the theological education of the medieval person. And actually had windows ما كانوش غير on the floor plan, ما كانوش غير on the first floor, كانوا even higher up. Because when we look at the nave, we see that it's made of three parts. We have the nave itself with the aisles, and then we have the triforium, which is basically when the roofing starts to lean downward, and thus it gives us this triangular shape in a cut. We see the triangular shape to the sides, and this is called the triforium. And sometimes it's even a passageway that has windows into the inside. بعد above it we have the clear story, and the clear story is even more windows to flood the space even more with divine heavenly light. And then coming out from the nave, we get to the entrance of the cathedral, or the west end of the cathedral, which is usually the facade. And Gothic facades are mesmerizing. When we look at early Gothic facades, we see one important element. We see the rose windows, the western rose windows, and these rose windows كانوا فوق البيبان تاع the cathedral, and they also told stories of Judgment Day and other theological stories. And under هادوما the rose windows we see the entrances to the cathedral. And the entrances to the cathedral دايما يكونوا عندنا ثلاثة. One big one in the middle, يتمدنا access to the nave, and two small ones that give us access to the side aisles. And the doors had what's called a tympanum. And in Latin, tympanum means a drum. And we see on the doors we have repeating arches, and each arch would show a set of saints or prophets and so on. And at the last arch, in the big part, we always have the Judgment Day in the middle. And we look at the columns, where we have the columns that are sculpted with figures of prophets and so on. And it's basically the Old Testament prophets lifting up Christianity in the arches and in the story of the last arch as well. And then when we look to the right, usually the right door is dedicated to everyday life, it's dedicated to the labors of the year and so on. And the left one, or the south one, is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Bon, هذا the last one to the Virgin Mary. Usually نبدلوه مع the middle one, depending on whether the church is consecrated for Mary or not. And all of these elements made the Gothic facade as a big story. Those are in the Gothic facade, and you would see many stories told in it. And on this, we're gonna end today's video. In the next video, we're gonna talk about the architectural aspect of the Gothic and why the pointed arch were such a revolution. We're gonna see other innovations. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Please share, like, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you think below. It's been the Nerd. Have a good one.